Thomas Davis. I profess my day job, and sometimes by night I'm an emergency physician. But then I also work as the president of Commonwealth Educational Opportunities in a volunteer capacity to advance conservative education policy in the state of Kentucky. And as a father now of 3 girls, I was especially motivated and frustrated by watching the teachers' unions hold our children hostage for multi-billion-dollar ransom payments for several years. That in itself was very motivating to enact change. And I think it's incumbent on us to follow through with that energy, that frustration, to really set the course of education in Kentucky straight. So what I'm going to focus on here tonight with you guys is really primarily focus on the nuts and bolts mechanics of some legislation, specifically focusing on school choice and what it's going to take to get that across the finish line. It's a multi-step process in order to do this, and I'll explain why it's a multi-step process. But then what's going to follow after me is Dr. Houchens, who's a professor of education administration at WKU, and he's going to lay out, I think, a really exciting, I've not heard it yet, but from the sounds of it, a really cool vision of what conservative education looks like going forward. And I think that will be very inspiring. So we're all have a shared vision of what we're fighting for. What should education look like in Kentucky, in the United States? Not the progressive education that's unfortunately taken hold of our schools across the state. But I want to start with just a few core tenets, making sure we all agree on some of the same principles. And I hope that we can all agree on this. But first of all, if you believe that families should be able to send their kids to a school that shares your values, then I want you on our team. If you believe that the tax dollars for education belong to families and not to any particular school, and in fact that instead the schools have to earn those dollars, earn your support, then I want you on this team. And if you believe that the best way to hold schools accountable is to empower families to move their kids out of a school that isn't good for those children, then I want you on our team. So hopefully we can agree on those core principles tonight. In my opinion, like that last tenet we talked about is the ability to move kids out of schools. There's a lot, and when we talk about reforming schools, I think it comes down to 2 concepts, and I've talked about this with you guys before in this room, but it comes down to both transparency and accountability. And if you don't have both, we're never going to create real reform. Yeah. And so there's a lot of efforts on legislation to create transparency in the classroom, which is extremely important. But I'm going to focus a little bit more on the accountability form. And I will say a lot of people will criticize school choice saying that it's not accountable. I think that is the farthest from the truth you could ever come up with of an excuse. Because there is nothing more accountable, no greater form of accountability than allowing a parent to take the money out of a school and go somewhere else. Money speaks, and we should give parents the ability to vote with their feet and vote with their pocketbooks. So in 2021, Kentucky passed the state's first school choice bill, the Education Opportunity Account. It's a relatively small bill, bold in some ways. And I will say the one way that it was particularly bold is that it protected the autonomy of all private schools in the sense of school choice, which is a deal breaker for us. We never ever will support a bill that infringes upon the autonomy of a private school, a Christian school. Otherwise, they're not private. And so that is a deal breaker, and I want to make sure everyone trusts that if that were to ever happen, we would kill that bill. We would ask our legislators to kill that bill. And I will tell you, the good news is the states that have the biggest school choice programs have the most autonomy. Why? Because the bigger your constituency, the more kids and families who benefit from school choice, the bigger your voting bloc to protect against infringement. The smaller you are, the smaller you think in terms of school choice, the smallest, of course, being no school choice, the least amount of power you have to protect against government infringement. Going all the way back to Oregon in the 1920s, they still don't really have much of school choice in Oregon, but back in the 1920s, they didn't have any school choice then. They outlawed private school in the 1920s. So keep that in mind. The bigger we are as a school choice community, the better we're going to be able to defend the independence of private schools. Unfortunately, though, despite passing that bill in 2021, the state Supreme Court here in Kentucky overruled it and said it was unconstitutional, based on some atrocious legal theories that were crooked lines that made no sense, but it's no surprise from what we've seen in our judicial system in the state of Kentucky. Because of that, Kentucky is now one of only 2 states in the United States that does not have any school choice offerings. Us and North Dakota. Every other state has either private school choice or charter schools, or both. So what the Supreme Court made extremely clear is that if we're going to have school choice in Kentucky, then we're going to have to pass a constitutional amendment. And I know it scares a lot of people, given the recent history with the right to life, but I will tell you guys a few things. First of all, this polls a lot better. The idea of education freedom polls a lot better coming out of the gates than life. I think they should poll just as well. But it polls very well coming out of the gates. You know, the right to life movement got wildly outspent, 6-1. We will not let that happen. You can't win a war without ammunition, and we are going to fight. We're going to fight hard to win this battle. So I think there should be a lot of optimism on this. And to be quite honest, there's a lot of support amongst Democrats for school choice. So not only can we win the conservative bloc, but we're going to take the fight to the Democrats, and we're going to peel away votes from the Democrats, just like the abortion people try to pull away my conservative, registered Republican wife to try to convince her to vote for abortion, which of course she didn't, but they tried, and they won in some cases. We can do the same thing to the Democrats and peel away liberal-leaning people who also believe in education freedom. You know, the thing I think we need to keep in mind right now is, I think of this as a donut hole in Kentucky. Every state surrounding us has school choice. And in fact, it's quickly becoming every state surrounding us has universal school choice, meaning that the money follows the kid. So you look at Indiana, now Ohio, just across the river from here, West Virginia, North Carolina, and probably later this year, you're going to see Tennessee pass universal school choice programs that are going to be incredible. For families, great for the economy, and at some point it's going to be very hard to convince people why to live in Kentucky if you can just move quickly across the river and send your kid to any school you want. You know, the other day a friend of mine was going to church in Ohio, and the pastor there said, right after they passed the bill last year, he said, you know what, starting next year, every kid who wants to go to our schools will be able to go to our school for free. And that's pretty cool. That gives me goosebumps, and I want to see that happen here in the state of Kentucky, where kids can have a good conservative education, something that Dr. Houchens will talk more about. But my goal tonight is just mostly to talk about how do we do this? And so I think there are 3 phases to enact this strategy of creating phenomenal school choice program in Kentucky. First, we've got to put pressure on legislators in the current session that just started this week. So we should expect, once a bill is filed for a constitutional amendment, that everyone in northern Kentucky ends up co-sponsoring this legislation. You know, those in the room here today have done a great job of that. Thank you. I don't know if Mary Ann's here or not, but everyone, they've done a great job of it. There are some, though, in northern Kentucky, or even Republicans, who have yet to co-sponsor school choice. And so I think we should have the expectation that we put particular pressure on those who have not to go follow through and co-sponsor legislation. Second, we got to win in primaries. So in particular, thinking about District 66, we worked as an organization very hard 2 years ago to help Representative Rawlings beat Ed Massey. And he did a phenomenal job. He worked hard, knocked doors. He won 2-1. Phenomenal. But we cannot be complacent. We have to win again and show him that this is an issue. This is a litmus test for Republicans to be good on school choice, on conservative education policy. And we're going to prove it. Because, I'll tell you, Ed Massey thinks that he can win this time. Well, I think he's foolish and rather crazy. I think he can win after losing 2-1, but we're going to prove it to him just to make sure he remembers that. But I ask for everyone's help to make sure of that. It's going to take door knockers, phone bankers, and a lot of word of mouth to help create some great energy for people like TJ over there. So please get to know him, understand him. I will, as my own personal endorsement of TJ in this case, I will say that TJ has arguably done more during the COVID to protect our liberties than the legislative body, the Republican body, did the entirety of COVID.
Yep.
And so I think we should all agree. So don't remember that as we step out of the room tonight. You know, help people like him, help people like Steve Rollins when he's running for Senate, be successful. And then finally, you know, we're going to have November of 2024. Let me back up actually. The reason it's important, the primaries, is technically the third step in time in some ways, because when we win in November of 2024, when this constitutional amendment gets on the ballot and we win, it's going to be because of our work in May for the primaries that gets people elected so we can pass the best bill possible. That's why it matters to have a really good ground game to support legislators who are out here and other candidates in the room. So I want you guys to remember that's why it's important. But in November of 2024, we anticipate seeing the school choice amendment on the ballot for everyone to vote for. And I talked a little bit about making the case for it, but the other thing we need to remember is we have a lot of wind in our sails. If you're just looking at the strategy, it's a presidential election year. No one's running for Senate this year. It's going to be Biden on the ballot in November of 24. And I don't know about you, but if you put a constitutional amendment to support conservative education when Biden is on the ballot, I feel pretty dang good about our opportunity to win. And so you guys should too. But we're not going to be complacent. We've got to make sure Northern Kentucky brings it home. You know, you guys are part of the Golden Triangle for a reason in terms of population. With a large population base here in Northern Kentucky, we've got to have a really good showing and great turnout to support the amendment here in Northern Kentucky. So again, it's the same principles over and over again. It's the basics: door knocking, phone banking, word of mouth, fundraising. That's what it's going to take to win. So right now, I'm not asking for your all's, you know, financial support or for your volunteer time, but I want you to keep thinking about what are relationships that you guys have in the community in terms of relationships with schools and churches that we can leverage to help us find volunteers, to find paid door knockers, to come work with us so we can get the word out. So, you know, after Dr. Houchens speaks, please come find me afterwards. I'd love to hear more about your own personal connections and ideas you have to help network throughout Northern Kentucky, because that's what's going to help us have the path to success for the entire state. I'm extremely sympathetic to your question. There is a lot that is out of our control right now. You're going to see, I anticipate, multiple amendments be filed. Some amendments I will be enthusiastically in support of, and I think you probably will for the same reasons in terms of the clarity and brevity. I do anticipate, though, that there will be some, I'm concerned some of the amendments may not be so clear. Which one ends up being chosen is yet to be determined. So I don't know. I wish I could give you more certainty. I will tell you, we will certainly be advocating for what we think is the most concise language and the clearest. That being said, you also have to be legally sound. You know, you can't just have something that's super clear and concise, but doesn't hold any, it will not hold up in court. And unfortunately, the Kentucky Constitution, in some ways, makes that a challenging task to thread that needle very successfully. But very sympathetic to your cause. I think we will try to make it as good as possible. To make us feel a little bit better, there are two parts to the amendment. There's the bottom part, which is the legalese, but then the top part is the question. And you know, when we take tests as kids in high school, for example, we all have this natural tendency to read the first sentence of a question and then kind of skip to the end to fill in the multiple choice question. In that same vein of thought, having that good opening sentence, I think, is probably the most critical. And so if we can polish that and make it look really nice, I think that would be a win, even if the legalese is a little bit more complicated.
The conservative voices are mostly suppressed right now. So the people that we would want to write the bills probably won't be writing the bill. So the flip side of that is the leadership seems to be for pro-choice. There's 5 in leadership, and I would say 4 seem to be strong pro-choice. Pro-school choice. Right, when you say 4,
I would agree, yes. certainly 3 and maybe 3.5 I'd give them, but I would certainly agree with that assessment. So I think we'll get something. I think we'll get something pretty good. Once we start to, eventually we're going to file the bills, and we'll get to see how they're written. Some people are keeping it a little bit secretive right now, and I've gotten a little bit of hints in terms of what's going on, but to be determined.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's a real blessing to be back here and to talk with you again about the good work that is happening as conservatives seek to reclaim education in Kentucky. Of course, the battle for school choice is the front line in that work of reclaiming our education system, and I'm so grateful to Thomas Davis, not just for his comments here tonight, but for the leadership that he has shown on this issue in general. Thomas's organization, Commonwealth Education Opportunities, is the tip of the spear in the fight for education freedom in Kentucky. And I really believe that a lot of the progress we've made on this issue in recent years has been directly because of his good work. So it's a pleasure to be here with Thomas and to share this microphone with him tonight. What I would like to do is situate this conversation about school choice in a broader context of education policy in general and in the wider culture. So I've entitled my remarks tonight, "The Conservative Reclamation of Education." The conservative reclamation of education. And if you'll allow me, I'd like to sort of unpack what each of those parts of that phrase really mean: conservative and reclamation and education. And I will talk about policy, but mostly I want to talk about the spirit of the ideas that motivate our work, especially in the realm of education. There's a really interesting and an important debate going on right now within the political right that you will probably not see on Fox News or in the Daily Wire. Although if you follow Michael Knowles, you might have encountered some of this, because Michael Knowles is interested in this. But it's a debate about what do the words liberal and conservative actually mean. And I'm of the mind that liberalism and the ideas of liberalism are far deeper in our culture than we realize, and affect the way all of us think and behave in ways that we don't even realize. To the extent that I think there are even folks who are conservative who sometimes promote ideas that are actually liberal in their origin. So in that regard, I think it's important to think about, what does this word conservative actually mean, right? From the word itself, we can see that conservatives want to conserve something. But what is it that they want to conserve? That's a good question to put to our conservative lawmakers, right? And aspiring lawmakers. What is it that you want to conserve? I think most of us would say we want to conserve the political traditions of the American founding. And that's correct, that's not incorrect, but I actually think that's a rather narrow way of understanding what is really kind of an ancient political philosophy of life. One of the most important books that I have read in the last few years is a book you may not have ever heard of. It's called Conservatism, A Rediscovery. And I meant to bring it with me tonight so you could see how dog-eared it was and how I've highlighted and made notes in it, because it's so important to me. Conservatism, A Rediscovery is by an Israeli-American political philosopher named Yoram Hazony. And I want to read to you his definition of what a conservative is. This is what he says. A conservative is a traditionalist, a person who works to recover, restore, and build up the traditions of his forefathers, and to pass them on to future generations. I'll read that again, but what I want you to notice is that there's no mention of politics in that definition, because conservatism is deeper than politics. It's a way of life, right? It's something that's pre-political. So listen to that again. A conservative is a traditionalist, a person who works to recover, restore, and build up the traditions of his forefathers and to pass them on to future generations. So what does that mean in the realm of politics? Well, Houchens goes on and he says political conservatism is a standpoint, a political standpoint that regards the recovery, restoration, elaboration, and repair of national and religious traditions as the key to maintaining a nation and strengthening it through time. So we need to have a slightly longer view of the traditions we seek to conserve than just the American founding. Because here's the thing, the American founders themselves, most of them, did not see what they were doing as something innovative or even a revolution. Most of the American founders understood what they were doing as a restoration of a tradition that they held as English citizens, right? They weren't upset with King George simply because he was a king. They were upset because the king and parliament were violating ancient principles of the British Constitution regarding limitations on the king's power and the dignity of the British citizen, going all the way back to Magna Carta. So they saw the American founding as bringing back something that had been lost, right? And that Anglo-American political tradition is nested even more deeply within the heritage of Western civilization itself, especially as Western civilization has been shaped by the Judeo-Christian religious perspective. So what we are trying to conserve, I believe, and what is under threat, is Western civilization itself and all the ideas and values that have supported it throughout the centuries. So that's the word conservative, and I'm arguing that conservatives, the defenders of the traditions of Western civilization, need to reclaim our educational system. So why do I use the word reclaim? Well, to reclaim something means to take back something that once belonged to you, right? We use the term reclamation in relation to land use a lot. To reclaim a parcel of land is to return it to its original purpose. So what I'm suggesting is the education system in America and in Kentucky has to be reclaimed by conservatives. Because, friends, it has very much been lost. Now that process of loss happens slowly and quietly, but the fundamental purpose of education has been altered from a conservative to a liberal purpose over the period of the last 150 years. And that process is described vividly in a book called The Battle for the American Mind. It's by Fox News commentator Pete Hegseth, and I highly recommend that book. See, conservatives and liberals have very different views on the purpose of education. And as I see it, conservatives see two primary purposes for education related to that definition that I just read to you, right? So, first of all, for conservatives, education involves the passing down of a civilization from one generation to the next, handing on the values and the ideas and the institutions that our forefathers found valuable. G.K. Chesterton, one of the great English writers, put it this way: education is simply the soul of a society as it passes from one generation to another. It's the transfer of a way of life, right? So, of course, conservatives don't hold that everything from the past is worth conserving, or that we never need to make reforms and updates, right? Repairs to our institutions have to be made, both because there's inevitable decay in the best of institutions because of human nature, and because some institutions have proven themselves to be unworkable or unjust over time. But conservatives seek to make repairs to those institutions, causing as little damage to the underlying traditions as possible. So education is about handing on our civilization, but it's also about training students in a certain kind of citizenship to be able to lead the kinds of social changes that are needed that take us back to our core principles and our core values. So that's a first principle of conservative education. The second one is probably even more important. And that is that conservatives believe the primary purpose of education is to form young people for lives of virtue. Okay? Conservatives have a realistic understanding of human nature. We are fallen creatures in need of formation. We believe in an enduring moral order, which can be accessed through a combination of faith and reason, and we can be formed to better conform our lives to that enduring moral order. So schools in all their various forms exist to help parents in their vocation of forming their children in just this sort of way. That's the conservative vision of education. For liberals, education is fundamentally different because their view of the human person is fundamentally different. Liberalism is a thoroughly modern concept. It comes from the so-called Enlightenment era, right? Liberalism is based on the assumption that free individuals are the basic unit of society. Liberalism tells us that human beings can use reason alone to arrive at sort of universal political principles, and organized societies based purely on personal consent. That's a big thing for liberals, right? So they believe that the main purpose of government is to maximize what they see as individual liberty, freeing us from the constraints of tradition, which liberals always see as backward and oppressive, right? So this suggests a different kind of approach to education, one that is about teaching students to question and challenge the traditions of their culture and to liberate themselves from various constraints. In fact, liberalism encourages children to actively disdain their past and their cultural heritage, and we see this in the kinds of woke cultural Marxism that seem to be so pervasive in our schools now. Here's the other thing. Liberals don't really believe in an enduring moral order, and that has big education implications too. Instead, they believe it's up to each individual to define truth for themselves. So education for liberals is not about the formation of a particular kind of virtuous person, but rather forming young people to question everything and to decide for themselves what they believe. So I've spent a few minutes here talking about how conservatives and liberals have different views on the nature and purpose of education in a way that I hope makes it clear why I believe that if you consider the state of education today, liberals have basically won. And conservatives are in a position of having to reclaim this education system. The values and the structures and the purposes of education now advance a liberal and an increasingly left-wing agenda. And so for conservatives, all the things we hope to conserve through our education system are either under threat or have already been eliminated. Now, it's awfully tempting here to blame teachers for this problem. And certainly teachers' unions and the colleges of education, where a lot of them are trained, have a responsibility in this regard. But by and large, I think it's a mistake to pin this on teachers, especially in a state like Kentucky. I spent nearly 3 decades in Kentucky and in other states working closely with teachers, and I can tell you most of them are not cultural Marxists. Like most of us, their ideas have been shaped by liberalism in ways they are not even fully aware of, but many Kentucky teachers identify themselves as conservative, and I think they're sympathetic to a conservative vision of education. That's why I think we have to invite educators into our work of reclaiming education according to a conservative vision. And this is exactly what a lot of them privately tell me that they're longing for. But it will require a concerted political movement and a clear policy agenda to get the job done. So now that I've described why I think it's necessary for us to reclaim the education system, I'll talk briefly about what that looks like in practice. And I should note that my comments here are strictly related to kindergarten through 12th grade education. Our colleges and universities have many other complex problems, and that's probably for a different talk for me to begin to address those. So for now, let me just talk about what this means in the K-12 realm, right? So first and foremost, as we've already said, we need to pursue a universal school choice policy where we fund students, not systems, right? We already do this in higher education. Students get to pick the education provider of their choice using public dollars in many cases to access those education options. So dollars should follow students with a minimum amount of regulation about how those dollars are going to be utilized. balanced, right? And that will enable every family to choose alternatives to public schools so that their kids can get an education that best meets their values. But unlike some of my friends on the right, I don't believe that school choice solves all of our education problems. We cannot abandon traditional public schools. Even if we may ourselves choose private education or homeschooling for our kids, we can't give up on the kids who are still in traditional public schools. Because here's what we know, even from states like Florida, which has among the richest school choice policy environments in the country, most parents, at least at this point in history, are continuing to choose a government-run school for their children. And if we leave those schools to the liberals, those schools will continue to be incubation chambers for some of the worst ideas of the political right. So we have to engage in public education. And that means we need a concerted local effort to elect self-consciously conservative people to local boards of education and site-based decision-making councils. And I'm really pleased to hear there's an active effort to do that right here in this region of the state. Because these positions are as important, if not more important, than official positions in the federal and the state government. And we should treat them as just as important. See, part of what conservatives need to bring to their leadership of these boards of education is not just a set of policy priorities, but it's a truly conservative mindset about the nature and purpose of education, what we've been talking about here, that schools exist to form children in virtue and to pass on the best of our civilization to future generations. Just having that open and explicit mindset will make a difference because our schools have drifted so far from that core purpose. So we've also got to directly engage the administrators of local schools and districts. Not as adversaries, unless we have to. Sometimes we have to engage them that way. But primarily we want to engage them as partners. Because the most important work we have to do in our schools is to ensure high quality academic rigor in core academic subjects and to help shape a curriculum that reflects the core purposes of education, especially when it comes to the way we teach history and civics in our schools. We can teach children the complicated and sometimes ugly history about our past, while also celebrating all that's good and why it's worth preserving for future generations. Research shows that's what parents of all political persuasions basically want from their schools. And there are already some organizations out there doing this work to give parents and educators tools for reclaiming the education system. Here I want to put in a plug for a group called Freedom in Education. It's a national group. You can find them online, Freedom in Education. One of their founders is Beanie Gohegan, who is a mom and education activist from Louisville. She'd be a great speaker for your group at some point in the future, right? She's actively involved in this, and Freedom in Education offers a huge set of tools for making traditional public schools better and more reflective of conservative values. So if this is a passion issue for you, I encourage you to look into Freedom in Education and how you can support their work. Of course, everything that I've described here is strengthened by giving parents options. And that's why it's imperative, no matter what we do, to pass this constitutional amendment and then press lawmakers to adopt robust school choice policies. Because until there's a genuine market of education options, we're facing a major uphill battle in getting our schools to be more responsive to our demands for change. So I appreciate your interest in this topic. I encourage you to keep up the fight, first and foremost by pressing your representatives and state senators to support this constitutional amendment, and then in November, encouraging your friends and neighbors to vote for it on the ballot, and then we can carry on that work of reclaiming education for a truly conservative purpose. Thank you. Yes, sir?
Do you have a ballot number on that yet?
We do not. No. We need we need them to introduce it. Well, how does that go in? Will it be a bill resolution first, Thomas?
I mean, so it's like a typical bill, it needs 60 people in the House to pass, and then it does not go to the governor's desk. It does not veto it. It will go straight to the ballot for the people to either veto or ratify.
I think there's among our bill sponsors, I think there's a real interest in making sure this is perhaps the only constitutional amendment on the ballot this year. That would be helpful if that were the case, but I know there's some other issues that people would very much like to see on the ballot as well, so we'll see.
This is how you can get involved. Number one, you want to hold your representatives accountable, contact them, have them support school choice, explain to them why. Number two, we want to win primaries. So if you can volunteer to knock doors, make phone calls, whatever the campaign may need, contact your legislators and ask. We need to educate the community on the benefits of school choice. We want it on the ballot in November. So let's educate our family and our friends and neighbors. Feel free to share this video so that we educate one another.
Parents are in charge.